Hi everyone tuning in. My name is Debora from Slation College Sunada, and I'm here today to talk about the freedom of speech and expression. This is for the second semester students. Paper is CC4 Media Ethics and Law. Before moving on to the topic, I would like to say that the freedom of speech and expression also includes the freedom of press. Why? You will get the answer as we proceed. So let's start. Freedom of the press in India owes its origin to the Indian Constitution. The Constitution is not an act, but it is the guiding force behind the fundamental principles of the nation and the body politic. The Indian Constitution guarantees various fundamental rights to its citizens in the Part 3, which is entitled as Fundamental Rights. One such right is freedom of speech and expression. Under Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution of India states that all citizens shall have the right to freedom of speech and expression. The philosophy behind this article lies in the preamble of the Constitution, where a solemn resolve is made to secure to all its citizens liberty of thought and expression. Now, there are certain elements of the right to freedom of speech and expression. These are: firstly, this right is available only to the citizens of India and not to foreign nationals. Secondly, the freedom of speech under Article 19(1)(a) includes the right to express one's views and opinions at any issue through any medium. Example, by words of mouth, writing, printing, picture, film, movie, etc. Thirdly, this right is, however, not absolute, and it allows government to frame laws to impose reasonable restrictions. And the last element is, this restriction of the freedom of speech of any citizen may be imposed as much by an action of the state as by its inaction. Thus, the failure on the part of the state to guarantee to all its citizens the fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression would also constitute a violation of the Article 19(1)(a). Yes, so now moving on to the grounds on which this freedom could be restricted. This is included in Clause 2 of the Article 19 of the Indian Constitution, which imposes certain restrictions on free speech under following heads. Firstly comes security of the state, then friendly relations with foreign states, then comes the public order. Fourthly is the decency and morality, followed by contempt of court. Then defamation. Seventhly is incitement to an offense, and lastly is sovereignty and integrity of India. Again, the Article 361(a) of the Indian Constitution permits publication in a newspaper substantially true reports of any proceedings of either House of Parliament or any legislative assembly, provided it is done without malice. However, publication of any report of the proceedings of a secret sitting of a house is prohibited. So we see that though the Constitution allowed freedom of speech and expression in Article 19(1)(a), but this freedom is not absolute. It is subjected to reasonable restrictions as mentioned in Article 19(2). And the last sentence of Article 36(a), also the term freedom of the press has not been mentioned in our Constitution. Now though there is no separate provision as freedom of the press in our Constitution, still the Indian Supreme Court has mentioned in various cases that the term freedom of expression includes freedom of printing, publishing, circulation and propagation, which means freedom of the press. Yes. Thus, the Indian journalist and the Supreme Court reinforced foundation of the freedom of the press in India. Since freedom of expression is guaranteed to the citizens of India, press also has equal rights as a citizen. It has no higher status. At the same time, press cannot be put under any special restriction which is not applicable to a citizen. As a citizen can appeal to a court against trespassing his constitutional rights, the press also is at liberty to approach to the judicial authority for transgressing any of its right to freedom by anybody or any authority. Now, a journalist or any author has to take care that he does not violate any of the restrictions imposed on the freedom of the press by a number of acts and rules made on different subjects according to the need for the benefit of the society. To explain the issue, it may further be stated that it is true that as an individual or a man, he has his right to express his thoughts and ideas freely. It is his individual right, yes, but simultaneously we have to keep in mind that it is also true that man is a part of his society, so he cannot be allowed to do anything which is harmful to the society or to another individual. Now, in other words, along with freedom, man must also respect his social obligations. His freedom thus must be limited. This is called social control. Therefore, for these reasons, the Indian Constitution is referred to as a balance between individual rights and social control. Okay. Now, so then the question is, do we really have the freedom of press in India? Now, in this context, the term press is identified as media for dissemination of news, views, and advertisements. If we consult the history of the press in India, we find that there is no particular document to prove that there was freedom of the press in India before independence. The Act 11 of 1835, made by C.T. Metcalfe, the then Governor General of the British East India Company and ruler of the Indian colony, was the lone exception. Again, that Act too was concerned with submission of declaration by owners of printing press and printers, publishers of newspaper or magazines published from British occupied part of India. Now, after independence, with the adoption of the Constitution of India in 1950, the Indian citizens were formally allowed to enjoy some fundamental rights. Now, these rights begin with the right to equality in Article 14. Yes, the Article 19 deals with the right to freedom, which starts with Clause 1 and mentions all citizens shall have the right A. to freedom of speech and expression, B. to assemble peacefully and without arms, and so on up to G. to practice any profession or to carry on any occupation, trade or business. This Article 19(1)(a) is therefore the foundation of the freedom of the press in India. But it is to be noticed that in 7 different types of freedoms mentioned in that article, there is no mention of the term press. Okay. So, some people point out to the propensity of the Indian Constitution to argue that we do not have freedom of the press in India according to the statute. Now, in contrast, they also refer to the very first amendment of the US Federal Constitution, which mentioned Congress shall make no laws abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. This transparency is, however, absent in the Indian Constitution. Again, we see that the Indian Constitution has imposed some restrictions on the freedom of speech and expression. The Article 19.2 mentions that government can continue to use the existing laws and can also make new laws imposing reasonable restrictions on this freedom regarding matters involving sovereignty and integrity and security of the state, friendly relations with foreign countries, public order, decency, morality, contempt of court, defamation, or incitement to an offense. Thus, those people argue that we do not have the freedom of the press in India. Now, to counter the above argument, it may be mentioned that in the USA too, most of the state constitutions cite that the state has the right to interfere if the freedom of speech or the press is abused, and the abuse of such freedom may be punished. Now, on the other hand, the founders of the Indian Constitution argued, and majority of the Indian citizens believed, that we do have freedom of the press in India. Their reasons were that the Indian Constitution has not mentioned anything which imposes the freedom of the press. On the contrary, it gave special importance to the freedom of speech and expression by including the same as a fundamental right and putting this freedom on the top of the serial numbers in the list of 7 types of freedom. So the press definitely has freedom in India. Also, this is why we see the print and other media continue to flourish remarkably in this country. This could have been possible only due to the existence of the freedom of the press in this country. Moreover, by the landmark verdicts of various cases, viz. Ramesh Thapar versus State of Madras in 1950, Birj Bhushan versus State of Delhi in 1950, Express newspaper versus Union of India in 1959, and Sakal Papers versus Union of India in 1962, the Supreme Court of India has repeatedly and unambiguously declared that people of India, including the press, are free to express, collect, print, publish, and circulate news and views. And also that this freedom was insinuated in the guarantee of fundamental rights, the freedom of speech and expression. Thus, in India, freedom of the press has both positive and negative sides. On the positive side, the Constitution allows the freedom, and on the negative side, it imposes some reasonable restrictions or limitations on the freedom in the greater interest of the country as well as of the human society. Now, it may also be mentioned, therefore, in this connection, that to allow more access to all government held information and government's tendency to brand all its activities as secret, the USA has enacted Freedom of Information Act in 1966. That Act too has 9 restrictions like national security, personal rules and practices, federal statutes, etc. On the other hand, the Government of India also in December 2002 enacted the Freedom of Information Act. In the meanwhile, the Tamil Nadu, Goa, MP, UP, Assam, NCT, Delhi, Rajasthan, Maharashtra state governments have already promulgated Right to Information Acts in their respective states. So, it may be concluded that we have freedom of the press in India, but this freedom is not absolute. It is subjected to reasonable restrictions. So, that's all for today. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
This and other episodes of Radio EduPods, Radio for Learning, are available on Listen to My Radio app at 6 p.m. from Monday to Friday and at 6 a.m. from Tuesday to Saturday. All episodes are available on Salesian TV YouTube channel. Share, like and subscribe Salesian TV, the ultimate learning resource channel.